For more on this, let's bring in Matt Whitaker, former acting U.S. Attorney General. Matt, thank you for being here. Let's get right into this. The Supreme Court makes these pivotal decisions on affirmative action. It torpedoes Biden's student debt relief plan, boosts religious liberties. It led to these headlines. Look at this. New York Times, Supreme Court decisions on education could offer Democrats an opening. Another headline from Bloomberg, the Supreme Court just gave Democrats a new 2024 rallying cry. You know, we saw what happened during the midterms after Roe v. Wade. Democrats took advantage of that on the campaign trail. What do you think? Is this going to be a political liability for Republicans, Matt, or is this an opening for Democrats as they think it could be?
Well, it's good to be with you today, Brian. You know, what I know about this Supreme Court is they're actually making Congress do their job of legislating. And so in each one of these cases that you mentioned, I think they are saying, if you want this, if this is your view of the way America should be, then you need to pass the law. And you can't count on the courts to do the hard work of the political decision for you. But what's really important, I think, is that, you know, this conservative bloc, and a lot of it's led by Chief Justice Roberts, has done exactly what he said he'd do in confirmation over a decade ago, and that is that he would call balls and strikes, and that's what they're doing. You know, unfortunately, the courts are being pulled into these purely political issues, Brian, that they're having to decide, but most of the times they're just pushing it back to the people and through their elected legislators.
Yeah, Matt, on that point, what do you make of the viability of the argument that's now being brought up by the Biden administration that they're going to go back and take another swing at this using the Higher Education Act of 1965, saying that it empowers the Secretary of Education to waive massive amounts of student debt? What do you make of that?
Yeah, Brian, this student debt forgiveness plan by the president and his allies is a crass and cynical political play. They know that if that really should happen, that Congress needs to pass that law through the elected representatives, and they know they don't have the votes, and so they're just giving hope where there should be no hope. There is no ability of the executive to forgive student loan debt under the current state of the law, and the Supreme Court has said that, but they're going to keep this alive because they believe it helps their elective opportunities in 24. I think it's pure politics. It's the worst, the most base version of it. And, you know, remember, the people that are going to have to step in the gap and then pay those forgiven student loan debts are the people that either paid off their student loans before now or are blue-collar workers that never went to college in the first place, or law school or medical school. So, Brian, it is a pure, crass political move by the Biden administration.
You know, there are now renewed calls by Democrats to overhaul the Supreme Court following these decisions. We saw this after the Roe v. Wade decision. Congressman Ro Khanna from California had this to say to The Guardian. Let's pull it on the screen. Call for number 2. He was asked whether or not, well, he's calling for term limits for these justices. And The Guardian asked him, in addition to term limits, would you also support expanding the court? What do you think of that proposal? And he ended up saying this is a court that is out of touch with attacks on modern life. It's a court that is regressive, that is rolling back women's rights, rolling back rights about racial equality, rolling back environmental protections, rolling back now assistance for young people. And it's exactly why we need term limits on these Supreme Court justices. And he's also saying that, you know, not only term limits, that the expansion of the court is also open to consideration, is on the table.
Yeah, Brian, those are terrible ideas. You know, who needs term limits is our members of Congress like Ro Khanna, because, you know, our founding fathers never intended this permanent political class and these career politicians to run our country. They expected ordinary citizens to sacrifice and to serve in those roles and then return to their communities and live under the laws that were intended. You know, this is the interesting thing for me as a lawyer and as someone that's dealt with the courts a lot. You know, we don't want the courts to make these political decisions, but the Democrats, because they have been successful in previous court terms, have relied on the courts to do the things they can't get the American people to support at the ballot box. And so, you know, let's instead of these packing the court or otherwise trying to change the court's composition, why don't you take these propositions to the American people and try to win the elections on them?
I mean, you bring up a good point. A Fox News poll, call for number 4, most Americans agree that affirmative action should have been shouldn't exist. As a matter of fact, 52% of Americans approve of the decision of affirmative action being put to the wayside when it comes to college admissions programs. 32% disapprove of the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision. Look, if you have the public support for something, get it done in Congress. Point well taken there. The President Biden, you know, he was asked about this. He said this is not a normal Supreme Court. And then he had an interview on MSNBC when he said this. Let's roll that sound. Listen.
Do you worry that without court reform, this conservative majority is too young and too conservative, that they might do too much harm?
Well, I think they may do too much harm. I think if we start the process of trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy.
That you can't get back.
That you can't get back.
Matt, quickly here, do you think that he can hold back progressives on this? Seems like he wants to have his cake and eat it too on this issue. What do you think?
Yeah. I think it's going to be hard. You know, the Senate's going to require 60 votes on anything that would change the composition of the court. I think at the end of the day, this is a much longer term project by both the right and the left. Obviously, for 50 years post-Roe, the conservatives have tried to impact the courts and who is on the Supreme Court. And they did that with the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and the opportunities he was allowed to appoint judges onto the court, and he did a good job with those 3 justices. And so the left needs to, again, win elections and do the hard work of putting the right people in these spots. But, you know, at the end of the day, our founding fathers thought the Supreme Court would be the weakest branch, not the strongest branch like we find it today.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General Matt Whitaker. Matt, thank you for being here. And just one clarification, that was an ABC News poll, not a Fox News poll for those at home. Matt, thanks again. Molly.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.